Welcome back, everyone. Mike McConville here. One more time for String Tech, Stratford, Ontario, Canada. We are just getting ready to put the frets in this guitar, and this is the big payback now for all of that preparation that we did, correcting the fingerboard and cutting the frets to length, clipping off the tang for the overhang, beveling and polishing each and every fret. When you take the time to do that, installing the frets ends up being the easiest part of the job. So here is a new trick that I've just started using lately. This is like an emery board for your nails. Pick them up at the dollar store. They're like $1, I think it's $1.25 I paid for this. But because it's got a foam backing, it kind of flexes beautifully to cover the radius as we bring this in a little closer. And I'm going through all the steps. That was the coarsest one that I was using. This is our second step. So one of the things about doing a spline like this, it's very easy to follow the exact curvature and shape of the original neck. That spline, I cannot feel that anywhere. It's done. When the finish goes on there and you pick the guitar up and play it, you will not feel a thing. Now this is going to need to be filled in a little bit. This is the third grit on the emery board. And again, it's a sponge, so it flexes to that radius on the back of the neck. Very cool. This is 400 grit. So there. So this is just cutting into the top coat. And that's dead even now. So that's 600. Here's our 800 grit. And this is our 1200. I'll let that sit till after lunch, and we'll come back and give it a light scuff. Then get on with the rest of the job, the fret work. We're going to do the finish on this one tomorrow. All right, we are back to Dawn's Epiphone Les Paul that was shipped down from Ottawa for the neck surgery. The neck surgery is completed. I will complete the finishing after I do the fret work. After consulting with the customer, initially I was going to do a partial refret, but the frets are pretty worn. He's playing this guitar. You can see the wear marks. They're chewed up pretty good now. Because they are pretty low to begin with. They're like 42 thou. You can see up around the 12th fret, they're flattened out pretty good too. Some of it was probably from factory dressing, and the rest is just the customer playing the guitar. Now, I have marked in chalk all the inconsistencies that I'm going to take care of or concentrate on along the lay of the neck. So I did that while the guitar was tuned to E-flat tuning, 11 to 48 strings. Adjusted the truss rod to get the neck as straight as possible, and these were the spots that showed up. So with a short block, I will brush those areas that I've marked with the white chalk. On the treble side of the neck, from the 1st fret to the 7th, I'm going to brush that very lightly once I get these frets out. And at the top end, there's a little bit more correction on the bass side than there is on the treble side. So we'll get these frets out and make those corrections. Just that little bit of heat helps the frets sort of slip out. Just a quick heads up to let you know where I'm going with all this. I've got these 5 blocks laid out, sanding blocks for the fingerboard. I have one 120 block this length, and that's going to do all those corrections that I pointed out a second ago. And then I'll follow this 120 block with the 180 block. And then finally, I'll go full length with another 180 block, the longest one. So that leather-lined sanding block with the 600 gets rid of whatever scratch marks are in the plastic. And then finally, I will follow up the 600 with 800 grit, and that will polish the inlays. And I can see scratch marks in those inlays right now from the factory. We'll do a better job than the factory did. The old frets are out, the fingerboard is corrected, all the new frets have been cut to length, the overhang has been clipped off, and they've been beveled and polished, ready for installation. All these frets are placed in the right order, and that takes all of the guesswork out of the job. There's a little tiny bit of overhang that we'll deal with, but the idea of cutting those frets so close, when you go to edge dress, you don't loosen up the fret on those outside edges where the overhang is. I even polish the ends so that there's the least amount of resistance possible to the mill file. So it's not only the slot depth, but you can check the depth of the tang to make sure it matches. And we got as close to a perfect match as you're going to get. This is our completed fret job now. So these frets are 108/51, 108 thou wide and 51 thou high. So they've been edge dressed, slight leveling in a couple of places, recrowned and polished. This is the compensated nut for 11 to 48, tuned down to E flat. This has been sanded to 1200 grit. The mahogany splines have been wood filled and sanded smooth. Now we'll just shade in those splines. Everything else is done. The compensated nut's been under full string load overnight, no problem. It handles those 11 to 48 strings at E flat. Sounds great, actually. I guess it's Epiphone's version of a 59 standard. Big chunkin' late 50s C profile neck. Structurally, it has been completely restored, even with that nasty end grain to end grain break. As I mentioned in that first video on this guitar, I went with a 3/8 inch wide spline. This type of break where you have end grain to end grain, there is zero structural integrity at that joint when you glue it up. Putting a back strap on is not going to save you. So with these thick splines, we have rebuilt the whole neck. We're drawing the strength from the neck itself and up into the headstock. And this portion of the break, of course, is just less than 1/8 of an inch deep. But as you saw earlier, these splines sweep down into the deepest part of the break and tie the whole thing together. The splines from end to end are about 7 5/8 of an inch. We'll just say it's 7 inches because it tapers on either end. On each spline you have 3 times 7, so the inside wall, the outside wall, and the floor of that spline, that's 21 inches. So between the two splines we've got 42 inches of long grain to long grain gluing surface. I've never had one of these things break. We'll finish up the coloring and top coating and get this back to the customer. Well, the guitar is essentially done. We got 12 coats of lacquer on there. We're going to let that set. I don't have an Epiphone custom shop decal, but I do have the Gibson decal. I'll let those 12 coats kind of firm up, and then it'll just be a matter of putting this decal on, covering it with 3 clear coats, final water sand, assemble, and we are done.